Hi, my name is Dan Risley, and I am with CCC Intelligence Solutions, and I am here at iCar's brand new, state-of-the-art, 48,000 square foot training center. Now, be more specific, we're actually inside of 6,000 square feet that's solely dedicated to an ADAS lab. And with me today, I have 4 industry experts that have a lot of knowledge and deep operational and technical knowledge that they're going to share with all of you today. They're going to share their insight, they're going to share their wisdom, and they're going to share their experiences with you. And our goal today is that when we're all done, that we're going to answer some of the questions that you might have, maybe your staff, and maybe perhaps even some of your business partners. That being said, I'm going to ask each one of you to please introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest, and maybe your role or responsibility specific to scanning and calibrations.
Sure. So my name is Bud Center, Director of Technical Products and Curriculum at iCar. Been in this industry for a very long time. I hate to say the years, but it's rapidly approaching 40. So I've been doing it a long time. My interest in this, obviously, with iCar, it's all about training and getting this information out to the industry, getting everybody to understand it and to adopt the OEM procedures and requirements.
Welcome.
Thanks, Dan, and that was quite the intro. Nicely done. My name is Arlo Johnson. I'm the Senior Vice President of Commercial Programs for Driven Brands, and I support their collision vertical of business. For the past several years, I've been working directly with insurance and OEM business partners, developing programs that help to add value to our network. And I'm very happy to be here today. Obviously, scanning and diagnostics is a big topic of conversation amongst insurers and OEMs in our shops, and anything that we can do to help demystify the aspects of all of that and get the word out, help more of our body shops engage in these practices in-house. It's time well spent. So appreciate the time here today.
Welcome, Arlo.
Darrell Amberson. I'm the President of Operations for LaMettry's Collision. We have 10 collision locations in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. We've been embracing ADAS work now for approaching 10 years. I'd like to think we're early adapters. A lot of passion for it. Mostly it's about trying to do the right thing for the consumer and for our business. I also involve myself some in some industry relations and functions and things like that, including finishing a 2-year term right now as being CIC chairman.
Welcome, Darrell.
Thank you.
Good morning. Dane Rounckles with American Honda Motor Company. I am the collision marketing manager for American Honda National. I represent our certified network and our collision programs for our dealers to allow parts procurement. I've been in the automotive industry for many years, probably about 35 years, many years at the dealer, and then as a collision field rep, and now as national manager.
Welcome, Dane.
Thank you.
And once again, guys, thank you very much for taking your time today to come and flying into the iCar Tech Center, spend a little time with us today. So I'm going to jump right into this, but I'm going to start with you to my left. Right before you opened this state-of-the-art facility, I think there was a couple press releases regarding iCar and maybe making some changes or additions to roles in the training curriculum. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and what was the reason for it? What caused that change? Because this is a little bit different than what iCar's done in the past.
So I think what you're talking about is the addition of the ADAS optional role. So we created an ADAS role really because we recognize that there is the need for that knowledge and skill in the collision repair industry. So we created the educational programming to go along with that. We have currently a number of online courses. We have, I think there's 14 courses. I should really know that number off the top of my head, but I believe it's 14. Mm-hmm. We have 11 of those courses that are prerequisites that are required before you come into any of the hands-on training. But we developed all of this training to address the industry need. Anytime we get out to an industry event, we always hear things like, ADAS this and ADAS that, and we need training and we need, people to understand it. And there's not a vehicle produced today that doesn't have some form of ADAS on these vehicles. Mm-hmm. So as we went out, I can tell you that Darrell's location is an early adapter with all this stuff, or an adapter with this, because we, in our early investigation and understanding all of this, we went out to the industry. We didn't say, iCar is going to create something in a vacuum and in a lab. We went out to the industry, the experts, the people that are doing this, and got to look at what they're doing, what's required, how are they doing it, and then came back and said, okay, now we need to develop courses to help the rest of the industry understand what's required. We continue to have conversations with folks about, how are we doing ADAS calibrations, and you hear some pretty scary things. You hear things like, well, it didn't set a trouble code, it didn't set a light, so we didn't calibrate it. We've talked to people about how are they doing their calibrations, and we've talked about this earlier, that some of us will tell us that they're using a third-party provider because they don't have enough space in their shop. But when we ask them, well, how are they doing the calibrations at your shop? If you don't have the space, how do they have space? And we hear some things like, we do the calibrations in the parking lot. There's not a vehicle on this planet that you can properly calibrate in a parking lot. Now, there are some that are obviously dynamic where you can drive the car outside, but that's a little bit different, and it's not sitting. I'm talking about these static calibrations using targets and sitting. You can't do it properly in a parking lot. There are a lot of vehicle conditions surrounding the environment that have to be right. So, yes, we put that ADAS role in place. It's currently an optional role.
Okay.
I think there could be a time where it becomes something that's a required role, but at the current time, it's an optional role for the industry.
Great, thanks, Bud. And obviously, I already said it, we're in 6,000 square feet, so iCar listened to the needs and obviously have delivered upon that and delivering some great curriculum.
Absolutely.
Dane, Darrell, go ahead.
And I think to a few of us that got into it earlier on, it became apparent that this ADAS technician is a new section or segment unto itself. It's different. It's not a traditional, obviously not a body tech, obviously not a traditional mechanic, not even a diagnostician. It's different, it's new. And the other orientations can help in terms of understanding the vehicle technologies and collision and things like that. That's all helpful. But this is something brand new. And I agree, Bud, and I think in the future, we're going to see more and more emphasis on this technician role.
Dane, I'm going to go over to you. So tell me a little bit about Honda. So I know iCar's got some curriculum they're developing. What is Honda doing in that area? Do you have classes, and what are some of the expectations maybe for the Honda certified shops?
We do. We have 4 online classes currently for ADAS, and we understand that every manufacturer has a different ADAS system. So we don't want the shops to assume that one ADAS system will work the same on every car. So we require all of our certified networks to do 4 online classes before they can become certified. And as time goes on, as we develop new systems, we'll have new required classes.
Great, thank you. Darrell, back to you. So I know that you have a calibration center, a dedicated calibration center over at LaMettry's. What are you doing to make sure your team is staying current? Are we looking at the iCar classes? Are we looking at the Honda classes? What sort of things are you doing with your staff to stay current?
All of the above. We enjoy the opportunity to participate in many vehicle manufacturer certification programs, getting a lot of trainings through that. We've been interacting a lot with iCar. We've had staff at this new facility already getting training, up to Appleton getting more training, and it is all about the newness and the training, the technology about it. So doing a lot with that. And learning a lot on our own as well. One of the areas that we wrestle with is it's one thing to read the factory repair information and perform a calibration. It's another thing when it doesn't work right. Now we're getting into diagnostics and some unventured trails here. So we're learning a lot about that and actually having a lot of fun doing it.
Sitting here in the lab that we're in now, the ADAS lab, in here we're currently set up for our 3-day static calibration course. And that's, in these courses, it's not your traditional iCar course where you sit in a classroom and an instructor lectures for an hour or 4 hours or whatever it is. This is hands-on. When you come to this environment and this training, we have multiple brands represented, and this is our static calibration course where when they come in here, by the time they're done, in order to pass the course, they have to prove that they can do these calibrations. It's not as if they come in and they just get instructed and they go through. By the time they leave here, they have done many different brands. And it's a static calibration proving ground, so to speak. We're in the ideal environment for training. You've got all the right equipment, all the OE tools, and everything that's required. But this here is all about skills proficiency training. When you leave here, you know how to do it.
So, Bud, I'm going to stay with you. So I know that over the years, we've had insurance carriers that required iCar Gold Class. And I don't think that anybody's retreated from that. You probably see more of that, right? And I also know, as you guys have delivered curriculum, a lot of times the carriers adopt that and actually incorporate that as part of their requirements to be on a DRP program.
Sure.
And I think welding certification is probably a really good example of that. Do you envision that this could also kind of follow on that same path where we're seeing maybe carriers and others saying, hey, look, we want you to have the welding certification and we want you to have some ADAS credentials?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's something that'll take a little bit of time. We've had conversations with many of the insurance carriers, many of the vehicle makers, and talk through this and how important it is. We've had insurance carriers that have participated in this training that we've done in here. And some of the consistent feedback we get from some of the folks that aren't quite as familiar with doing these calibrations is that when they start to dive in here, I had no idea just how intricate, how involved, how technical these things are and how much time it takes. You know, there is, unfortunately, there's no shortcuts. You know, when you get these processes and procedures to do these calibrations and it says, you know, drop a plumb bob from here and mark a spot, and drop a plumb bob from over there and mark a spot, and then measure out, you know, X number of millimeters, and now go at this angle and hang the, there's no shortcut. You have to do every step of this, and these procedures will get as involved as making sure that the washer bottle's full, that you have the right amount of fuel in there, that the tire pressures are right. You know, there's nothing in the trunk. I mean, it's that detailed. So I absolutely see that in the future this will become something that'll be more required for both insurer programs, but also vehicle maker, their certified programs.
That's actually a really good point. So thinking of the car manufacturers, Dane, Honda, I believe, has some position statements centered around scanning.
We do.
And really specific, I think, when it comes to what is the expectation for your certified repair shops. And I'm like Bud, a little long in the tooth, so I know that. Historically, Honda came out with a position statement, but I think that's even changed a little bit over time.
Has.
So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so originally we came out with a pre and post scan position statement that said we recommend in any collision that you do pre and post. And well, honestly, it was a recommendation and nobody really took the time to follow it. And as the vehicles have developed and advanced in time, we have changed that to must do a pre and post scan every time the vehicle is in a collision. And some people say, well, what qualifies as a collision? An impact is a collision, and it must have pre and post, because you don't know what you're working with until you do that pre-scan, and you don't know that it's safe to deliver to the customer until you do that post-scan.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to be your story guy here for a minute.
Oh boy, okay. Have at it, bud.
So just because it falls right in line with what Dane was just talking about, my daughter was involved in a rear-end collision. She was rear-ended a few years ago, and she's in a different state. So I sent her to a collision repair shop where I've known the owner for probably 15 years, and a very highly regarded collision repair shop. And one of the first things I asked for was I want to see the pre-scan. I want to understand what's going on with this vehicle, because I wasn't there. I couldn't go physically look at it. I wanted to understand what was going on. And I asked and asked and asked for weeks that turned into months. And then I finally got pretty frustrated and said, I want to see the scans. Because after months of having the car, they said it's done. And I couldn't see, I never got these things. So then I finally said, I want to see it. So they sent me a scan report that just said, code's cleared. And I said, well, what does that mean? So I called them back and said, well, what is this? They said, well, let me step back. The first thing they told me was that's just a manufacturer recommendation. It's not a requirement. And I said, well, hang on, let me send you the position statement that says, no, it's required. And it's required that you use an OEM scan tool. So I sent all this stuff over to them. They then sent me the report that said code's cleared. I called the shop that had done the scanning and said, well, what did you find when you did the scan? And mind you, they did the pre-scan post-repair because they had never done a scan at the beginning. And he said, well, I didn't even look at the codes. They just told me to clear them, so I just connected and cleared it. And I said, well, did you use an OEM scan tool? Nope, I used Aftermarket. So I get back to the shop and said, look, you're going to send this to a dealer. We're going to get it scanned. It's a long-winded story, I know, but to kind of wrap it up here, when it got to the dealer, to the manufacturer, and they scanned it with an OEM tool, they found that the code that had come up that they cleared was for a faulty clock spring in the airbag. So had my daughter been in another collision, potentially could have failed right? So you look at that and go, guys, we got to get on this. We need to understand this. These scans are not something that you just do it if you have the, you kind of have, oh, today I want to do a scan. These things are required. You need to get these things done.
Yep.
And it's not just for things like this. I mean, if the shops think about it, it helps you. Is the shop owners, the shop side, I've been on the shop side. How many customers do you have come in when the car is done and say, hey, I got this problem, I never had it before. Right. A lot of times you've got these history codes that will show you that yes, it was actually here before, and I did a scan when the car came in and it already existed. So it's not just about those things. I mean, the safety part is the biggest part, but that's part of it as well.
Well, I think you bring up a good point, and I always share this story as well, is, why do we take pictures of the vehicle after an accident? Why do we take a picture of all four corners? And that's because we want to document pre-existing conditions. And I kind of envisioned the scan kind of being that same thing. Like, I can't see that, so why don't we do the scan? If we're going to take a picture of the outside of the car, things we could visibly see, why wouldn't we want to plug in a scan tool for the things we can't see? So Arlo, I'm going to pivot over to you. You've been a little quiet, so I'm going to bring you into this conversation.
Sure, let's go.
So obviously you have a lot of franchisees within your network. And Dane talked a little bit about OEM position statements, and I'm going to delve into OEM position statements, OEM repair procedures.
Sure.
And I would like to know, what are you hearing from franchisees relative to the effectiveness, the use of, if Honda comes out with an OEM position statement, is that something your franchisees are able to utilize? How do their carrier partners respond to those sort of things?
Sure, I'll say largely it depends, right? Different carriers have different perspectives on these things. I think, OEM position statements, while they're rooted in the right things, they don't always work as intended when we're thinking about, where the rubber meets the road and, shops getting reimbursed for procedures. It can become too easy for a shop to just take a blanket position statement and attach it to every estimate and use that as, complete justification for all of their, scanning and diagnostics, and that doesn't always work well at that level. So we coach our shops to dig in and research the repair procedures and provide those repair procedures to their insurance partners if those repair procedures detail the scanning operations. Otherwise, the OEM statement can work as well. Look, ultimately carriers want to understand the why behind the operations we perform, not just the blanket, here we're going to do it because the OEM said so.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And Darrell, you have a lot of experience with that as well. As you talk about the position statements, they're helpful. And I think, Dane, when we had some conversations earlier, like the position statements are there as supplemental. They don't replace the OEM repair procedures. I think I heard you say that too, Arlo. It's like the repair procedures are really, the carriers want to understand the why. They don't want to see just a position statement. So Darrell, you have any follow-up comments to that?
Oh, a lot on that. First of all, on diagnostic trouble codes or fault codes that you mentioned, it really needs to be understood that there's way too much misunderstanding out there that fault codes are just inconvenience that need to be cleared and get out of the way, and then life is fine and you can move on. The correct term for them is diagnostic trouble codes, which really means the system has found an issue, it's bringing it to your attention, and it's to help guide you to the root source of the problem and then correct the problem, and then you clear the code. You don't just get rid of it. It's a diagnostic tool. So we need to think more in terms of that and then correct the issues and then clear the codes. The factory repair procedures, yes, very reliant on them. Cars are just so much different than they were in years past. They're so sophisticated, we have to become reliant on it. And the manufacturers are the experts. We can no longer be the people that were when I was taught way back. We were talking more generic repair procedures, heating, shrinking, pulling, measuring, things like that. And you could apply those skills and create a solution for the repair. That world is gone. Now we have to rely on the vehicle manufacturer because of the complexity. So we have no choice but to do it, and they are the expert. And then looking at the factory repair procedures, yes, that only tells part of the story, and oftentimes the job aids and things like that help clarification. For the most part, it's going to help bring more clarity and understanding and complement the repair procedures. There are many situations. I know we've reached out to Honda and other companies in the past and said, sometimes I read something, okay, so cars hit, say on a radar system, radar unit. So I get that. I have to replace it. I have to calibrate it. How about if the car's hit a foot over? How about 2 feet over? How about 3 feet over? And when do I do a calibration? When do I not? And we need that information to help us to do the proper thing. And there again, if I determine that a foot away or 2 feet away I do or I don't, I'm becoming an amateur engineer. And again, that world is gone. We have to rely on the experts to make those decisions for us, to protect our customers as well as protect our businesses.
I would say that just one quick add on to what Darrell had. He talked about the OEM procedures, and they are obviously critical. Everything that we do at iCar, we tell people follow OE procedures. Period. They're the Bible, the gospel. But it's also important to understand that some of these vehicle makers don't have position statements because they rely on the procedure itself that will tell you that you need to do the calibration or the scan or whatever it is. They rely on the procedure. So there's not always going to be a position statement, but the procedure in a lot of cases will have that statement in there.
Yeah, I think Audi's probably a really good example of that. I think that's one of the car manufacturers that they're pretty empathetic, and they say it a lot. It's like, we don't have position statements because our position statements are already contained within our repair procedures. So I think that's really a good thing for people that are listening to understand that position statements are great supplements, but you should always refer back to those OEM repair procedures to make sure that you're following any changes that may have occurred. Because even as you said, Dan, you've had some changes occur over time, right?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify one thing. Whenever I said pre and post scan, it's an OEM software pre and post scan. I want to make sure that that's clear.
It's a good clarification because I'm going to jump into another question. We're going to have to get some clarity.
So position statements are not the repair procedures. Like you said, they're supplemental. They're additional information that may be raised by the industry. It may be a concern that we've addressed because it's been brought to our attention. So, you must follow the repair procedures as they're written. If you have questions, please contact us. We'll assist you.
Great. Arlo, I'm going to come back to you. And I know Driven Brands earlier in the year, and I think you actually made an announcement even recently too, had made some announcements regarding some alignment with some strategic partners for you, for your franchisees, as it relates to scanning and calibrations. And you had made a choice to work with service providers, and service providers that can provide both an aftermarket scan as well as an OEM scan. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And in the context of this, there's a lot of choices for shops. Like there's a lot of different paths they could choose, but you chose to go down the path where the shops had the ability and the flexibility now to keep it in-house. So tell us a little bit about that decisioning and why you landed on where you landed.
Well, the in-house decision is the key point there, and speaking to that from an industry perspective, I think we definitely need to work more at getting body shops away from I send it to the dealer because they make the lights go away, right? Like there's all kinds of opportunities to keep that in-house. There's all kinds of rationale to keep it in-house, right? For one, once the car leaves your body shop, you lose control of the repair, and now you're adding cycle time. You're going to be more challenged to keep your customer happy because you're uncertain as to when you're going to be able to deliver the vehicle. You're adding cost, which increases severity to your insurance partners, right? So none of that good, right? On the other side, you're probably ignoring the opportunity to increase revenue at your shop by dabbling into more scanning and calibration activities because there are some of those that body shops can engage with. They don't necessarily have to have the perfect environment, right? They can do some things with a less than a perfect environment. So what can they do, and how do we as a network educate them, which leads into our decision to partner with both Opus, IVS, and Aztec. And we did that for a number of reasons. One, they both provide the OEM and aftermarket scans inside of one tool. So that's a one-stop shop for the majority of body shops out there. They offer the expert OEM assistance, if needed, which is a critical aspect. And both of them have pretty interesting conduits and tools built in to help stores understand what are the ADAS components of the vehicle and what are the calibration opportunities that exist here. So all of that leads us into partnering with them. We also like where they're headed. They are investing a lot in their infrastructure, and we think they're leaders in the industry. Another piece of why we wanted to engage with them is they were the early integrators of CCC, right? So the CCC integration, we have a number of stores that are leveraging our preferred suppliers, and they have gone as far as integrating with CCC. And they're seeing productivity gains because they did that. And let's face it, right now we're looking for any sort of productivity gain that we can help arm our stores with. The other piece of it, more from a corporate perspective on the CCC integration, is data and information, right? So this information on how stores are using their scanners, at what frequency and with what vehicles, it's very difficult to get our arms around, but now with the integration through CCC, we can get good data that provides us insights so we can have more targeted training and education with our shops to promote more in-house scanning and calibrations.
So I'm hearing a lot about efficiency, efficiency, efficiency. But something that you said is probably really flying in the face of maybe what some of the listeners would normally hear. So when we talk about some of the service providers, we said they do an aftermarket scan and OEM scan, and we have an OEM in the house. And when you hear the word aftermarket, I know that the hair on Dane's back is kind of going up. But Dane, it's kind of interesting because I get this question a lot, and I think there's a little bit of confusion in the industry, and I'm hoping maybe you could provide a little clarity around this. So he mentioned two of the service providers that they've partnered with, that is Opus and Aztec, and there's a third one out there, there's AirPro.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe, and you need to fill in the details and the blanks here, Honda is actually, I don't want to say aligned, I don't know if that's the right terminology, but recognizes them because they do provide OEM scans.
That is correct. We've contracted with each of those providers to offer an OEM subscribed scan. So the important part of this is whenever they do a remote diagnostic scan for you, they are able to utilize our data immediately. So if we've made a change yesterday, they have it today, and to do a correct scan using OEM software. And for our certified network, whenever you use Aztec, AirPro, Opus, or whomever, we require what we call the OEM native scan. So while each of those providers offer you a report on their side, on the back side, whenever they use the IHDS or HDC, either one, HDC is Honda Diagnostic Cloud. So either product, it produces an OE native scan. And then as long as the service provider can provide that to the shop, that will qualify for our certified network, showing that they're doing OE scans.
Thanks for the clarification on that one, because I get that one a lot. It's like, well, can they really do an OEM scan? And I just heard from you that they can do a Honda scan through that service provider. So we mentioned in-house and keeping things in-house, but there's also variables in terms of keeping it in-house. And I think Darrell at your shop is probably a really good example of that, because you could do in-house with the service provider in the case of what Driven Brands is doing with their franchisees, but you could also do in-house and make investments in OEM tools and OEM software. Tell us a little bit about your model and what you're doing at your shop.
In terms of scan tools, we've embraced both OEM and aftermarket, and there are a lot of good aftermarket tools that can work very well. And we have lots of different brands that we've played with. And our most experienced, most competent technicians are finding in certain applications they can work quite well, and in other applications we need more and more OE scan tools. And if you look at the total array of our scan tools, the percentage of OEs have been increasing. More and more we are gravitating towards OE scan tools.
Okay, so what's interesting is I'm going
to be your story guy again.
All right, tell me a story, bud.
So it kind of
I want to hear one.
Kind of relates to what Darrell's talking about here.
Okay.
So when we were out doing our research and working with experts around the industry, and this is to your point about the OEM versus aftermarket tools, and I'm not going to say that aftermarket tools are bad. That's not what I'm saying. You just have to be careful and make sure that if you're going to use an aftermarket tool, that you know that it's working the way it's supposed to work. We went out to a location and they said, here, we're going to give you an example. And they took a brand new vehicle and calibrated it using an OEM tool, and then went out and tested the collision mitigation braking. We put one of our guys that's a cameraman here for this event we're doing today was in the back seat with a camera, and went out to this location, and as the vehicle's approaching the target with the OEM scan, it stopped, no driver interaction, the car stopped. Took that same vehicle and calibrated it with a aftermarket scan tool, went out into the parking lot, and it didn't even slow down. It punted the target 300 yards across the parking lot. Didn't even slow down. So it was, you have to be careful, because looking at it, just visually looking at it, it didn't really look any different. But there's obviously there was something different in the measurements or the target size or something like that. So you just have to be careful.
Thanks, bud. I appreciate the story, and I think we can almost do another panel discussion all around aftermarket scan tools, because one of the things I think that there's some confusion on, they're not all the same. So when you say be careful, bud, it's not a cautionary tale of don't do aftermarket. Right. It's a cautionary tale of make sure the aftermarket scan tool you're using is going to make sure it covers that make that model,
Right.
and hopefully all the modules in that car, right?
Right, that it's going to do what you need it to do.
You know, doing half the modules is not a proper scan, right? So,
Darrell, Arlo started touching on this, so we know that you're doing stuff in-house, and he kind of gave some of the value points of why they had gone down that path in terms of the value for the franchisees. What have you seen in your experience with LaMettry's keeping those in-house? What's been that value to your organization?
We see long-term so much opportunity in this area in that the increase in ADAS equipment and sophistication in vehicles, it's just a wave that's coming at us that you're just not going to stop. And the percentage of the typical collision repair that is dedicated to ADAS and high-tech is growing rapidly and will continue to grow. So the percentage that you're dedicating to this part of your business is growing a lot, which means in some cases this other part might be shrinking a little bit too, depending upon your company and the mix of work that you're dealing with. And so we've embraced that. One of the things we've also learned is that when we rely on somebody else, when you get into the complications, especially a difficult diagnostic situation, a issue where calibration might fail, somebody has to diagnose it. And so we really decided early on, we wanted to have that competence in-house and control that. So that we get those tough situations, we'd rather be the solution without having to rely on anybody else as much as we can. Not to say that there's never an exception, but for the most part, we're able to do almost everything in-house.
Mm-hmm. And it's a good point, right? Because one of the things that we talk about a lot is that, I think we all know that in a lot of cases, collision repairs operate on a pretty thin margin.
absolutely.
And when you think about what Darrell just said and the fact that the portion of your business that's related to ADAS and EV and some of these things is growing and growing quickly, how long can you afford to give up that piece of your business to a sublet vendor before your margin is gone and you just can't compete? So it's something that they need to think about.
Well, I'm going to date myself yet again, and it's going to be real evident by how I'm going to kind of characterize how I see the calibration going in the future. I'm going to compare it to the 80s. In the 80s, when they came out with a unibody vehicle, nobody had a frame machine.
Yeah.
So everything was sent off to your frame and alignment person, right? And then over time, the population of vehicles that had a unibody necessitated that I needed to keep that in-house, and now everybody has a frame machine, right? I don't think anybody can imagine not having a shop today without a frame machine. And I think calibrations are going to take that same journey and that same path because, Arlo, I think you may have said it was, you can almost start to become non-competitive too. If you're sending it out, maybe your cycle times are a little bit longer, maybe the price points are a little bit different, right? So it starts to challenge maybe some of your franchisees with their relationships with their DRP partners when you're continually outsourcing some of that work, as Bud had just said.
Yeah, I'll also, I guess, touch on another piece that Darrell talked about because some of it was you talked about, when the calibration goes wrong and having the in-house talent so that you can do these things. We have a course that we've developed in collaboration with Ford that focuses on that specifically. It's, Ford uses primarily dynamic calibrations where you drive the vehicle. They really only use static for some of their vehicles on the 360. So that course is focused on exactly that. It's helping people understand how all these systems are interconnected and the diagnostic mindset. And, if you plug in a scan tool, set it to learn, and you do a calibration and everything works, it's simple. But what do you do when the calibration fails? That's the piece that course is focused on, helping people understand how do you diagnose these things. When you pull it up, because it can be intimidating, right? Sometimes you pull these things up and you might have 15 codes and you're looking at it and go, oh my God, what does that mean? But then you start to realize that they're all connected. And okay, if you understand the diagnostic process, you can go back and okay, all these are related to this. This is what caused it. So that's what that course focuses on.
Dan, I think your analogy is good with one caveat. When you get into all brands, it becomes quite expensive and complicated. Not every shop's going to be able to do that. We're large enough, we embrace that and fortunately have some good talent. We've been able to invest in some equipment, but it's a big investment and we have 10 collision shops and now we're doing some B2B work to feed that. A typical single location shop operator may not be able to afford the space, the equipment to handle all brands. So they may have to focus on a specific niche area of the marketplace.
And I keep plugging on car, I guess, but there is a course that we have that if a shop is thinking about diving in, dipping their toe into the ADAS world, part of our research that we did when we went to LaMettry's and several others was understanding what does it take? What does it take for a shop to get into the ADAS world? What are the requirements, the space, the tooling, equipment, training, all of those things? And we actually have an online course that if somebody's thinking about getting into it, they can take that course and it kind of helps you understand what's required.
Okay.
What are you going to have to do?
But I believe that shops need to take the ADAS training, whether that be OE specific or iCar or whatever, to do a correct repair. Even if they sublet 100% of their calibration, they still need the training so that they know how to repair the vehicle from the beginning.
I agree.
So-
I make the statement all the time when we're talking about that topic that I'm not an attorney, so don't take legal advice from me. But the liability doesn't stop with you giving it to a sublet vendor. You need
Correct.
to understand that you need to understand how the vehicle needs to perform. You need to be able to determine that your sublet vendor did it properly. You need to be able to test drive that vehicle when it comes back and confirm it's operating properly. So you need to understand these systems, whether you do the calibration in-house or not.
Well, I'm gonna support you on this one, Dane. So walk me through the paces here. So I'm a shop, I'm gonna sublet everything out. Great. Well, Bud, you said if I send something out to be calibrated, there's not a guarantee that it's gonna calibrate, right? There's maybe an opportunity it could fail. So the training, Dane, is probably really important for those shops that are not sending it out to a sublet vendor, because the sublet vendor is not going to fix what the error is. They're going to send the car back to you
to
and
be
say,
repaired.
diagnose, fix it, send it
correct.
back to me, and then I'll calibrate it, right?
You can't take the word that it was calibrated correctly. You've got to do the post scan and deliver the car safely. So knowing the product of what you're working on, and each time you work on it, because things change daily. So
You know, I tell people all the time that, and this kind of goes to what Dane's point was, is that you need to understand these systems, right? If you send it out to a third-party vendor, these systems are sophisticated, but trusting. They trust that when it says, here's all the preconditions you need to set for the vehicle, and here's all the things you need to do to properly place the target, it assumes you've done it right. So when you tell it to calibrate, if you've got that target in the wrong spot, but it can still see the target, it'll calibrate to where you told it is the target, but it's calibrated now to the wrong spot. So you need to understand and make sure that if you're using a third-party vendor, that you're getting the documentation to support that they've done it correctly.
yeah, because the ADAS system may still be functioning, but not at the level it was designed to.
Correct.
You know, if the targets are set in the wrong place.
Yeah, we've even done some testing in-house to look at things like if you had a bent bracket, then you put a sensor back on and then you drove the vehicle, what would it do? So we've taken some brackets and shimmed them out with washers and things, and then we drive the vehicle and look at live data. And we've seen that at some cases you'll drive that vehicle and you'll see the system, it looks like it's correcting. It's getting itself, it's coming back to where it looks like it's going to correct, and then just it goes offline. And it doesn't pop a trouble light on the dash, it just, the system goes offline. Because it's recognized that it's off, it's not calibrated properly, and it goes offline. It doesn't tell you that it's gone offline. So it's you really need to understand these systems, and the test drive at the end is critical. You have to make sure these things are operating properly.
Yes, we've seen situations where there are no fault codes and the calibration's been completed and the screen says calibration successful, but yet the system's still not working properly. So that drive at the end is important to put somebody in the car that understands how the system works. In some cases, we have to refer to an owner's manual and get a basic understanding of how it behaves, send somebody out on the road, engage it, make sure it's really working as it's supposed to.
Yeah, there are even systems out there where you, whether you use your own cell phone, whatever it is, if you can record that test drive so that you can test all these different things and have a recording that says, I tested it, it worked, you're even better off.
Our discussion went long, so this is the end of part 1. So stay tuned and watch for part 2 to continue our conversation with our 4 industry leaders on scanning, diagnostics, and calibrations.